Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Bright Founders Talk at Temi. Temi is an international software development company that designs, builds, and delivers software for sustainable businesses and promising startups. My name's Matthew, and I'm joined today by Mr. Randy Woods, who is the Senior Vice President at a company called Valtech. How are you today, Randy?
I'm very great. Excellent. Thank you.
Terrific. It's always good to have such a positive start. Randy, before we get going, would you mind telling our viewers and our listeners a little bit about who you are and what it is that you do?
Sure. So Randy Woods, I'm located in Ontario, Canada, just southwest of Toronto. Today, I'm Senior Vice President at Valtech, a global digital agency, and I assist them in acquiring companies. So that's my primary role within Valtech. But the story is probably more just how I got here. Valtech acquired my company in 2017, one that I built with a business partner for 23 years. And I've had that transition from having sold a firm to actually being on the corporate side for the first time in my life. I have the rather unique opportunity to see deals from both sides, right, as a seller and as a buyer. And I think that's given me some insight into the end of the entrepreneurial process when you start looking at exiting and what that means.
Okay, so a little bit to unpack there. Let's take a step back. A company
Sure.
that you built, if I'm not mistaken, around 1995. Things were a little bit different then. Can you tell us how that came about? How did you get into it? Where did your idea come from? And talk us through the early stages there.
Sure, yes. 1995, a lot of things were different. I had more hair. It was a different color. It was a long time ago, right? The internet was brand new, was very young. So were we. Essentially, I had an old housemate from university, and we both had pretty decent jobs having graduated. I was working as a lobbyist in Ottawa with the federal government. For the good guys, I was working for the environmental lobby. And Shannon was selling software to the former Soviet Union. So we both had these interesting jobs, but decided that in our youth and foolishness, we wanted to do something which gave us more independence, and we thought we'd start a company. It's hard to imagine now, but no one knew what the internet was in 1995. I mean, it was a really challenging sales process, but nobody even knew what the internet was, let alone what a website was. So we were fairly clear there's opportunity here, right? It was, I think, to anyone really following the tea leaves, that there was going to be opportunity in the internet space. It feels a lot to me like AI feels right now. There's going to be something that changes the nature of the economy, and we wanted an opportunity to play. But we were not in a situation where we had a giant pile of cash sitting around or investors at the door. So we needed to do something we could bootstrap from scratch. And we built a services company. So very early on, we were running around building websites for anyone that would pay us. And we were doing it in tools like Notepad because nothing else existed. And neither Shannon nor I came from a technical background. So we found ourselves very quickly learning a whole bunch of things about C++ programming and HTML. But we managed to get that done. And we managed to acquire enough clients to keep the door open, to make enough money to hire people that actually knew what they were doing. And then we had people who could actually program and develop for real, and we were able to scale that company out. That was the beginning of it. Does that kind of get to the answer to your question, Matt?
Absolutely. So a big learning process you went through there, and I think you mentioned, obviously, nobody knew what was going on there with regards to the internet. I can personally remember not knowing what the internet was up until at least 97, 98. But then fortunate to be able to grow with that and to grow with the progress of the internet. Do you think that played a big role in your success?
Yeah, I think listen, I think entrepreneurs always like to feel that it's their good decisions and hard work that make all the difference. But sometimes, if we're honest, it's luck. And the older I get, the more I think being in the right place at the right time matters a lot. And the internet was growing so fast that it was a very forgiving place. We could make all kinds of mistakes that, if you were starting a restaurant, for example, would have bankrupted us. Although the internet was just this market that was exploding. And so you were able to be 10 minutes ahead of everybody else, and you were the expert. So it was a really interesting and forgiving place to start a company for two young people that had never had the experience of running a firm before. Now, we had to work very hard. We had to make good decisions. And we also had to, in some ways, interpret the direction the internet was evolving every day. Because in those early days, it was exploding and it was very unclear what it was going to be. And our job was to make clear to our clients how they should play in this space. And so I'm not pretending that there was not a lot of energy and intellect applied to our success. But I will say that if we were in some space that wasn't growing that quickly, we would not have had the success we had nearly as quickly as we had.
with this growth, I know that the company also ended up in expanding into international markets. How was that for you? You've told us, you started off, you didn't know anything about what was going on. You were learning as you were going, and now you start expanding around the world. What was that like?
Yeah, so over 23 years, the company went through various forms and did various things because the internet evolved, and the services we provided changed. So at the beginning, we were doing HTML websites and Notepad. By the end, we were one of the premier implementation firms working with a product called Sitecore, which is a content management system. In between, we expanded first regionally and then internationally. It's not uncommon for Canadian firms to expand into the US. So the model is basically you charge your clients in US dollars and then you pay your people in Canadian dollars, and that generally gives you about a 25% cash advantage. Depends on where the interest rates go, and sometimes they turn upside down and that wrecks your whole business model. But generally speaking, that's a model that many services firms in Canada undertake. And just geographically, we're far closer to New York and Boston and Toronto than we are to Calgary and Vancouver. So it's just easier to do business in, say, the Northeast than it is to do business across Canada. It's such a large country. So that's another reason a lot of organizations cross the border fairly easily. So the U.S. expansion was almost organic. Clients contacted us. We started doing it. Eventually, we had to figure out how to do that in a way that kept the tax authorities happy on both sides of the border. We learned a whole lot about transfer pricing and that kind of thing. And that went on for multiple years. And really how valuable that was depended on the things like, current interest rates, then also what the economy was like on both sides of the border. 2008 was very difficult in the US, and we did a lot more work in Canada than we did in the US that year. The broader and probably the more interesting international expansion was when we decided to build a team in Brazil. And again, this is a scenario where luck, happenstance, serendipity plays a role. We had decided we needed a lower cost source of talent. Actually, that's a lie. It wasn't really about lower cost. It's just we needed to find a way to attract high quality talent, and we were struggling in North America because the demand for talent was so high. And so we were looking at non-traditional locations, smaller cities in Canada, cities on the east coast of Canada, which are often underrepresented or not as well known to recruiters. And then we had one of our team members walk into our office who was Brazilian Canadian. And he said, look, I know 3 people on the island of Florianopolis in Brazil who could start work tomorrow to solve these challenges. And I'm like, great, start them, right? We'll do them as contractors. We started that way. And within a year, well, first of all, we realized they were great. Like, they were super high quality talent. They worked hard. There were some communication challenges, but they weren't something we couldn't overcome, especially because we had some people on our side who could speak Portuguese. And so we very quickly decided that this was a place we wanted to, double down and invest and take the risk. We didn't realize at that point how complex doing business in Brazil is. It's a difficult environment. Perhaps if we had, we might have made a different choice. But we were certainly able to find and attract just an amazing team in Florianopolis. And by the time we sold the company in 2017, I think we had about 35 people in Brazil, something like that, between Sao Paulo and Florianopolis. I can tell you that today at Valtech, that has grown to something like 1,000 people between Brazil and Argentina. So there certainly was a talent base there that was just waiting to be exposed to the international market. And that decision really transformed our company into something that was much more interesting, where we had access to a broader set of talent, and we were able to deliver for our clients kind of a unified team. We didn't differentiate between people based on their location. So our team in Florianopolis worked hand in glove with our team in North America. Most of our clients didn't know where their team was located, which was kind of a forerunner to what happened during COVID. We got lucky there.
Before I do, you've mentioned something interesting there, this expansion into Brazil and how it happened. So it wasn't, if I could say, it wasn't planned originally, but it worked out for the best. And one of the things that I believe you're quite interested in and like to talk about is culture building, bringing the right people into your company. And I think you said repelling those that will not benefit or be productive to you. Tell me, how do you go about making sure you've got the right people?
Yeah, maybe the single biggest challenge in a services company is to consistently bring in team members that sort of level up each time so that you're getting better over time, right? So you want somebody who, if you've got a new position, you want them to come in and your existing team to say, wow, that's a great addition. This person brings a lot of value we didn't have, as opposed to, wow, they've hired somebody right? Which is not very enthusiastic. That's a really hard thing. It's particularly hard when you're a startup and you're bootstrapping and you're not able to pay well above the odds. If you're in competition with a venture capital funded software startup, it's really hard to offer the kinds of dollars they make in Silicon Valley. So how do you do that? And there's a couple of ways that I think are valuable, or lessons we've taken away. So one is that your best advocates and your best recruiters are existing team members. So your best team members, the ones that you would most want to go to war with, the ones that would be the last person off the raft if the raft was sinking, they're the ones that should be deeply involved in recruiting, because they're the people who are best able to recognize like for like and attract people. So they're also the busiest people in the company. So it's a challenge, right? You're going to ask them to add one more thing to their job, but they are the primary source for the people that are going to help you grow. The second thing, I think, is to very early on identify for a new team member what their career path should be, or let me phrase that differently, where their career aspirations lie. So I think one of the traps that companies can get into is that they assume that there's only one career path, and that's to climb sort of the org chart. So if you're a developer, become a senior developer, become an architect, become a manager of developers, become a senior vice president of well, look, some people just want to be developers, right? Like they're great at developing and they're terrible at managing people. Why would you ever promote them? They'll hate it. They'll be bad at it. So that's not the career path for everyone. So having that conversation about where do you want to end up in 5 years, and having that in the first 6 months, and then helping them build a plan to get there, even if that means that you're acknowledging in 5 years they have to leave the company. Sometimes we'd have that conversation. They'd say, look, I'd like to work here for 2 years, and then I want to go and work for a global X. Or I want to work here for 2 years, and then I want to start my own startup. That's fine. Recognize the ambition, help them get there. And even if they succeed and they leave, I can guarantee if you've helped them, they will refer people to you, which will fit into your culture and help you build your organization. So those two things are really important. And then for the group that's interested in public profile, and that's not all of your team members, but there'll be a group that want to be seen as like the person with the knowledge, making sure that those people get public exposure as often as possible, and then recognizing that to the rest of the team, praising them for it, acknowledging that they're responsible for driving awareness of the firm and the work that keeps everyone employed. That can go a long way to making sure they stay engaged with the firm and feeling like it's feeding their motivations. So those are the three things I might suggest worked for us. They may not work for everyone, but they were certainly instrumental for our firm.
Randy, I love that answer. It's very, very detailed, and I like the way you think. So you've got a good team, you've built things together, and so we're moving on a little bit, getting to that COVID period. Talk us through that and the transition then to Valtech, the purchase and what happened there.
Yeah, so we, after 23 years, and I'm proud that we managed that company for 23 years. Shannon and I managed to retain our friendship through that. The general rule of thumb is never start a company with a friend or family, because you'll kill each other. And I've seen that happen so many times. It's a good rule of thumb. Shannon and I are probably the exception that proves the rule. And equally important, maybe more importantly, two of our earliest team members, Dan Roberge, Allison Simpkins, Abraham, they joined us very early on and stayed with us through the whole journey, 20 years, 23 years. So we were very fortunate to have a core of just incredibly talented people who grew with the company. And indeed, that was part of the motivation for us to go to market in 2017 to try and sell the firm. We had a bunch of people who'd been very loyal to us, have been with us in some cases for 21 years, 22 years, some with 16, 17 years. And our challenge was we couldn't grow the company fast enough to give them the kind of career paths they deserved, right? These are super talented people, and there's only so fast we could grow the company. And so, I'll joke that I could change your title, but it doesn't really change the job, right? And so we knew that for them to succeed, to rise to their fullest potential, they were going to have to leave the company. And that was one of the incentives for us to go to market and see if there was a bigger firm that might let them stay within the environment but still succeed. That, combined with the fact that after 23 years, we felt it was time for maybe us to take some risk off the table. We'd done this as a company, right? Those down periods are very hard on the stomach lining. You lose an awful lot of sleep. We were in an up period, but we knew a down period was coming in the future. We didn't know what it was. We didn't predict COVID, but we knew there was going to be something. And so the timing seemed right for us from that perspective as well. So we decided, and it was a hard decision, but we decided that we would, formally take the company to market.
Fantastic. So that worked out in the end. Touch me on those ups and downs a little bit, navigating those challenges. There must have been some learning curve, some sleepless nights. as well as some joys, some accomplishments and good times, right?
Yeah, I think, and I've said this in other places and been misinterpreted, so let me try and say it more clearly this time. I think being an entrepreneur is a very romantic job, with like the big R romantic, not the Harlequin romance romantic. Like, and what I mean by big R romance is like all of the highs are higher, right? Like there's nothing that can replicate the feel of the big win or the big success, or a plan just perfectly executing and coming together, or the right team being in an offsite and everything clicking. Like, it's just, there's nothing in my experience that can replicate that. The lows are lower. They can just be mind destroying. They wreck relationships. They can leave you in financial ruin. Like, there's the extremes are what you deal with as an entrepreneur, and sometimes they happen in the same day. So it's a uncomfortable lifestyle in some ways, but enormously rewarding if you're able to find a way to adapt to that. Yes, we had lows. The dot-com crash in the 2000s, everyone who was in the internet thought they were a genius. Turned out, nope, not so much. It was just a really good time to be in business. We had to learn a whole lot really quickly about what you do when you're downsizing. We'd never had to lay off people. We were trying to find people. What do you do when you have to, lay off a big piece of your business? What do you do when the bank's calling, and instead of wanting to lend you money, they want you to pay back money? That was something new for us too. So that was a very wrenching moment for, at that point, I don't know, maybe 28, 29 years old. We weren't terribly experienced as entrepreneurs. We had other challenges along the way. We had key technology partners either go bankrupt or get purchased out of bankruptcy. But in any case, they stopped being a core piece of what we could deliver. And that was very hard on our clients, but equally hard on us if we'd recommended that technology to our clients. And we lost some really strong relationships from that. There were economic cycles. There was the 2008 downturn in the US that was really challenging. We were fortunate enough to have a lot of Canadian clients, and we got through that fairly well. What actually was more difficult for us was when the oil prices collapsed, and we had a large group working with oil companies in Calgary, or just in Calgary, which is powered by oil. And so again, we found ourselves on the wrong side of the economic upturn. Didn't matter how well we executed. Sometimes if the markets shift, you can't succeed. That's, I guess, a very long way of me saying that we'd been through a lot of up and downs. We knew what it was like and what it took to go through the downturns. And we were at the point where we thought it was time to maybe step aside.
And so far, it's been a good decision. You were saying that you needed to, you wanted to let go of some of that responsibility, or not responsibility, but have a breather, so to speak. What about things that are happening at the moment? Maybe plans for the future? Are you going to get busier? Have you got some big things in the pipeline that you're working on?
Yeah, so very interesting. The biggest companies I'd ever worked for were ones that I'd started. Right. So I didn't really know what it was like to be an employee. So part of this is just me learning what it's like to actually have a boss, right? For the first time since I was stocking shelves in a grocery store when I was like 17 years old or something. So that has been a learning curve. It's tough. Valtech likes to keep founders around when they acquire a company, which is a little unusual because we're difficult to deal with, right? We're all pretty sure we're still in charge, and it's hard to let go of your former responsibilities and relationships. And there are good reasons that some firms are like, thank you, it's been really nice to have you around, but step aside. Valtech tries to harness that energy without having it get in the way of the integration and working as a larger firm. Partly they do that by giving you either too much work or super challenging jobs that are new. And one of the jobs that they suggested I might be appropriate for was this acquisitions role. And that involves conversations like this, just making sure Valtech's name gets out there, but also assessing when I meet founders who have an interesting company, whether or not they're a good fit culturally, financially, whether or not this is a deal I could recommend internally, and then also figuring out, if we do the deal, how to make it come true, how to put the proof in the theory we had on why it made sense to acquire them. And so it's been a fascinating journey for me. Yes, it's very busy. We've done last year's a quieter period. The previous year we did 9 deals. Last year was quiet because we were integrating those deals. I expect this year we'll do some pretty substantial acquisitions. And again, it's a learning curve for me. That's part of the reason that I've stayed with Valtech post-acquisition, is because I get to learn things every day in a new context, a new environment. And that's a value to me. Will I be here forever? Unlikely, but as I suggested earlier, that's okay, right? We all have career aspirations. They don't always have to be in the same organization. You just have to provide value where you stand while you're there.
That's a very interesting story, a very interesting journey. I want to maybe ask you for a broad outlook on the industry. So having started where you did and where you are today, if you stand back and you look at the industry as a whole, if I was an entrepreneur starting out in a similar field, what advice would you give me? Or what would you tell me? How has the industry changed? What can I learn from you that I don't have to bump my head against learning for myself?
Shan and I used to say that our actual business plans, that we're going to try and make every single mistake possible, but make them only once, right? So that's that way we get better. I'm not sure we made all the mistakes, but we certainly made at least our fair share and probably a bit more than that. So I can't share all of the advice in like a one session, but a few things strike me right now. It makes sense to look for a place where like the ocean's rising and all the boats are going up, because that's a fairly forgiving place. In my time, that was the internet when it showed up. I would suggest that what's happening with AI and generative AI right now looks to me to have that same kind of dynamic. It's a broad industry-wide piece. It's going to touch everything. The way that we do everything in the economy is going to change because of it. That was true of the internet. I think it's going to be true of generative AI. I would strongly encourage anyone who's thinking about starting a company to AI into the core of your thinking about what you want to become. And it doesn't really matter. I don't mean build an AI company. If you're going to build a real estate organization from the ground up, make sure that AI is at the core of how you're thinking about your value proposition, because I think it's going to be an accelerant that's going to give you a lot of success, or at least the opportunity for success. So that's my observation right now. And when I'm coaching entrepreneurs or young entrepreneurs, we talk a lot about that. That's one piece. I think early on, a couple of decisions are really important. We didn't make them, would that we had. One is, are you going to raise capital or not? So are you going to take investment, or are you not going to take investment? Seek investment, not seek investment. If you have a product and you need to spend dollars to bring it to market, it's very hard to bootstrap that unless you have the dollars in your own pocket, right? If you have to spend $1 million before money starts coming in. Unless you got that $1 million, it's really tough to get that done. So you probably have to raise capital of some sort. If you're a services company and it's your first firm, you can sometimes get that done just on the back of a credit card, because generally speaking, you do the work, you get paid. Sometimes if you structure your contracts correctly, you get paid in advance and then you do the work. So you actually have the cash flow to power the company. So I think that's like one of those fundamental decisions you have to make early on. Are we going to be a cash flow positive company from day one? That probably means services. Or are we going to have to find access to capital so that we can build the product to go to market? And those are very different dynamics. And then the piece of advice I've been giving frequently is start with the end in mind. What are you trying to accomplish? Not next year, not in 5 years, but in 20 years, right? Are you going to try and sell this company down the road? Because at some point, no matter how successful you are, you won't be running it, because if nothing else, you'll be dead, right? So you got to figure out like where you want to end up. Public offering, selling to a company, handing it to your kids, selling it to your employees. Those are all options, and they're all viable options. If you know at the beginning what you're trying to do, it's an awful lot easier to get there at the end. And I can tell you that if we had done that thinking in 1995, if we'd even had an idea those kind of questions existed, we would almost certainly have had a better outcome. We had a great outcome. I'm not complaining about that. I'm just saying it would have been even better had we actually had the foresight to do that as a planned process, instead of simply dealing with the day-to-day activities. So that's probably what I'd suggest as my takeaway. That's the 2-minute version. If you want the 4-hour version, give me a call.
Okay. On that note, for our viewers and our listeners, if they are looking for any more information, is there anything we can tell them that I might have skipped over for today about yourself?
It's a 23-year career, so I've got all sorts of things I can tell you.
Yeah.
Maybe the easiest thing is to say, I'm on LinkedIn. It's Randy Woods, and Valtech will probably find the contact for me. I could tell a long story about how we spun off a software company and raised a whole bunch of money during the dot-com boom, and then wound that back down when the boom crashed. So there's lots more to talk about, but probably all of that requires longer than we have. And the dot-com software company requires beer too, so to get through the story. So maybe it's not the most appropriate thing at 9:30 a.m. for me. But I am happy to correspond with anybody who's out there, any entrepreneurs that have questions. If my experience rings a bell or feels like it might have some application, feel free to reach out, because that's a big piece of my job.
Fantastic. Randy, last one for you. As one of my favorites, if I have to write a motivational quote on your bedroom wall, you have to wake up, you have to see it every day. Okay? You can't erase it. You wake up, you read the words. What do they say?
I'm tempted to go with something like, hey, you're still here. Congratulations, you made it one more day. That kind of feels like the way most mornings are. It's like, congratulations, you still exist. That counts as a win. Maybe something like, this is poorly phrased, but like get up and get going. Because at the end of the day, persistence and just the willingness to get started, take action, almost regardless of what the action is a key to success if you do it every day. And it's not always easy to thrust yourself out of bed and get into the game. So something that would inspire me to do that would probably be where I'd end up. But I'll come back to you with a better phrased version of that. And I might have to paint something on my wall now, Matt. Oh, my wife's going to kill me. She's not going to be happy with you. But that's okay. I'll point her to you instead of me.
That's it. Yeah, I'm going to change my name and address. Anyways, Mr. Randy, I'm gonna let you go on that positive note and go do something about my appearance. I just want to say thanks so much for sharing. And I know it is a limited time, and I know there are so many things we could have spoken about today, but I think you've really given us some valuable insight and some good info for people that are starting out, that are looking for answers and advice. So thank you for that.
Oh, not at all. Thoroughly enjoyable. I appreciate the questions, and hopefully I added some value for someone out there.
Terrific. Keep well, Randy.